Christmas dinner at Mom's house should have been special, but I watched from my chair as she handed out wrapped presents to everyone except me. My sister Jennifer squealed over the diamond earrings. Cousin Marcus grinned at his expensive cologne. Uncle Robert admired his golf accessories, and Aunt Patricia cooed over designer scarves. When I looked expectantly at Mom, she stared coldly and said, "Be grateful you can sit here." Uncle Robert chuckled. "Be glad we still remember your name." Everyone laughed. I calmly responded, "Good to know," while burning inside and making a decision that would change everything. I excused myself quietly from that table, walked to my car, and drove away from their laughter forever. The December air bit through my jacket as I sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white. 3 decades of memories flooded back during that silent drive home. I remembered being 7 years old, watching my birthday party get canceled because Jennifer had a piano recital. I remembered graduating summa cum laude from business school while the family attended Marcus's high school football game instead. I remembered Dad's funeral 2 years ago, where Mom introduced Jennifer as my successful daughter and Marcus as my athletic nephew, while I stood invisible beside the casket of the only person who ever believed in me. My apartment felt different that night. The modest one-bedroom place I'd called home for 5 years suddenly seemed like a sanctuary instead of a hiding spot. I sat on my secondhand couch staring at the small Christmas tree I decorated alone and realized something profound. Their rejection had been the greatest gift they could have given me. I pulled out my phone and began deleting contacts. Mom, Jennifer, Marcus, Uncle Robert, Aunt Patricia, each name disappeared with a satisfying swipe. I blocked them on social media, changed my emergency contacts at work, and even called my bank to remove Mom as a backup contact on my accounts. The silence in my apartment wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to worry about disappointing anyone or measuring up to impossible standards. I didn't have to pretend their criticism didn't sting or that their favoritism didn't matter. Christmas morning arrived without obligatory phone calls or forced visits. I made coffee in my small kitchen, ate breakfast while reading a financial report, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. No guilt about not calling Mom early enough. No stress about buying gifts that would never be good enough. No anxiety about walking into rooms where conversations stopped when I appeared. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and began working on something I'd been putting off for months. My business needed expansion, and I'd been hesitant to take risks while maintaining family relationships that required careful navigation. Now, with that burden lifted, I could focus entirely on building the success that would define my own worth, rather than seeking approval from people who would never give it. The next few days passed in a blur of productivity. I reorganized my apartment, threw out old family photos that only brought pain, and started planning a future that didn't include waiting for acceptance that would never come. I felt lighter, clearer, more determined than ever before. By New Year's Eve, I realized their cruel laughter had accomplished something they never intended. It had set me free to become the person I was meant to be, without their limitations or their grudging tolerance. The real gift that Christmas wasn't under their tree. It was the clarity that came from finally seeing our relationship for what it truly was. 3 weeks later, I stood in my downtown office adjusting my tie before a crucial client meeting. The view from the 20th floor stretched across the entire city, a reminder of how far I'd traveled from that humiliating Christmas dinner. My business partner Craig knocked and entered, carrying files for our 11 o'clock appointment. "The Morrison Industries team is here," he announced. "They're desperate, Nicholas. Federal audit, potential criminal charges, and they need restructuring within 60 days or they're finished." I nodded, reviewing their case one final time. Morrison Industries was our biggest client yet, a manufacturing company worth $200 million, now facing complete collapse due to financial irregularities discovered by the SEC. Saving them would cement my reputation as the most effective crisis management consultant on the East Coast. What my family never knew, what I'd carefully hidden during years of their dismissive treatment, was that I'd built something extraordinary. After graduation, while they assumed I was struggling in some dead-end job, I'd started small, helping local businesses navigate bankruptcy laws and restructure failing operations. My talent for analyzing complex financial problems and finding legal solutions had attracted bigger clients, then Fortune 500 companies, then major law firms, facing their own crises. Crisis Management Solutions now employed 15 people and operated from a prestigious office building downtown. Our client roster included pharmaceutical companies, technology firms, and multinational corporations. Last month alone, we'd saved 3 companies from federal prosecution and recovered over $50 million in assets that government agencies had attempted to seize. My personal wealth reflected years of careful investment and strategic business decisions. The penthouse apartment I'd purchased 6 months ago remained a secret, just like the luxury sedan parked in the underground garage and the investment portfolio that had grown to 7 figures. I'd learned early that success shared with my family became ammunition for their criticism, so I'd simply stopped sharing anything at all. The meeting with Morrison Industries lasted 4 hours. By the end, we'd outlined a complete restructuring plan that would save their company and keep their executives out of federal prison. They agreed to our fee structure without hesitation. $1.5 million plus 15% of recovered assets. It was the largest contract in our firm's history. Craig shook my hand as the clients left. "You just saved 800 jobs and a $200 million company," he said. "I don't know how you do it, but watching you work is like watching a master surgeon operate on dying patients." That evening, I reviewed contracts for upcoming cases. A pharmaceutical company facing FDA sanctions, a construction firm dealing with OSHA violations, a technology startup accused of patent infringement. Each case represented hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars hanging in the balance, all depending on my ability to navigate legal complexities that stumped other consultants. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but I ignored it. Since Christmas, I'd maintained strict boundaries about who could contact me and when. Business calls came through my office. Personal relationships were limited to colleagues and the small circle of friends I'd cultivated outside my family's influence. I walked to my office window looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the early January darkness. Somewhere out there, my family continued their lives, probably never giving a second thought to the son and nephew who'd vanished from their Christmas celebration. They had no idea that the person they'd dismissed and humiliated had become someone who could solve problems. They couldn't even imagine someone whose expertise was sought by companies worth more than their entire neighborhood combined. Tomorrow would bring another crisis to solve another company, to save another opportunity, to prove that success wasn't measured by family approval, but by the value I could create in the world. Their rejection had taught me to find validation through achievement rather than acceptance, and that lesson had made me wealthy beyond anything they could comprehend. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family member they'd always considered least likely to succeed had become the most successful of all, while they remained completely unaware of what they'd lost when they chose cruelty over kindness at that Christmas dinner table. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in mid-January. I was reviewing financial statements for a client when my assistant Jennifer knocked on my office door. Not my sister Jennifer, but Jennifer Walsh, the efficient 30-year-old who'd been managing my schedule for 2 years. "There's a federal agent here to see you," she said quietly. "Agent Thompson from the Financial Crimes Division. He says it's about Robert Manning's construction company." Uncle Robert. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud since Christmas, but apparently the government had taken an interest in his business dealings. I straightened my jacket and walked to the conference room where a serious-looking man in his 40s waited with a thick folder. "Mr. Carson," Agent Thompson began, "we're investigating Robert Manning Construction for federal financial crimes. Your name appeared in some business documents as a potential consultant. We'd like to ask a few questions about your family's business operations. I sat down carefully. Agent Thompson, I haven't had contact with my family for several weeks, and I've never been involved in my uncle's business operations. However, I'm happy to answer any questions within the bounds of attorney-client privilege. What he told me over the next hour painted a picture of financial catastrophe that stretched far beyond Uncle Robert's construction company. The federal investigation had uncovered a web of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering that involved multiple family members and threatened to destroy everything they'd spent decades building. Uncle Robert's construction company had been falsifying federal contracts for 3 years, claiming work that was never completed and materials that were never purchased. The scheme involved over $2 million in fraudulent billing to government projects. But that was only the beginning. My sister Jennifer's husband David, who managed the company's finances, had been systematically embezzling client funds to cover personal expenses and gambling debts. He'd forged invoices, manipulated bank records, and used company credit lines to finance a lifestyle that his actual salary could never support. The embezzled amount exceeded $800,000. Aunt Patricia's mortgage company had been connected to the scheme through falsified property appraisals and fraudulent loan applications. She'd been approving mortgages for properties that didn't exist and pocketing the difference in a conspiracy that involved dozens of fake transactions. Cousin Marcus had guaranteed business loans using fraudulent financial statements claiming assets that didn't exist and income that was completely fictional. When the construction company defaulted on these loans, his personal assets became liable for amounts that exceeded his ability to pay by hundreds of thousands of dollars. The most devastating revelation concerned Mom's house. Uncle Robert had used it as collateral for business loans, without her knowledge forging her signature on documents that put her home at risk of immediate foreclosure. The mortgage company, Aunt Patricia's company, had processed the paperwork despite knowing the signatures were fraudulent. Agent Thompson showed me photographs of seized documents, frozen bank accounts, and property liens that painted a picture of a family empire built on lies and maintained through illegal activities. The criminal charges being prepared included wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy, felonies that carried potential sentences of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The interesting thing, Agent Thompson continued, is that your name appears nowhere in these schemes. Your family members listed you as a business consultant on several loan applications, but there's no evidence you were ever involved in their operations or received any money from their activities. I nodded slowly. That's correct. I've been deliberately excluded from their business dealings for years. Apparently, that exclusion may have saved me from legal liability. After Agent Thompson left, I sat alone in my office processing the magnitude of what my family was facing. They weren't just looking at financial ruin. They were staring at criminal prosecution that could send several of them to federal prison for decades. Their assets would be seized, their reputations destroyed, and their freedom taken away. The irony was staggering. The family that had spent Christmas laughing at me, suggesting I should be grateful just to sit at their table, was now facing a crisis that required exactly the kind of expertise I'd spent years developing. Crisis management, federal criminal defense, asset protection, and financial restructuring. These were the specialized skills that could potentially save them from complete destruction. But they had no idea I possessed these capabilities. To them, I was still the disappointing relative who couldn't measure up to their standards, the one they dismissed and humiliated at every opportunity. They had no reason to think I could help them, and even less reason to believe I would want to after the way they'd treated me. I called Craig into my office and briefed him on the situation. "It's your family," he said when I finished. "Even after everything they've done, you're probably the only person who can save them from federal prison." I stared out my office window, watching traffic move through the city streets 20 floors below. Somewhere out there, my family was probably just learning about the federal investigation, probably panicking as they realized the scope of criminal liability they faced. Soon they would discover that their comfortable lives were about to disappear, replaced by legal bills they couldn't afford and charges they couldn't escape. The question wasn't whether I could help them. I had the expertise to navigate their crisis and potentially save them from prison. The question was whether they deserved salvation from someone they'd spent years treating like a burden rather than a blessing. The first call came on my office phone 3 days after Agent Thompson's visit. Jennifer Walsh, my assistant, intercepted it before it reached me. "Someone named Jennifer Carson keeps calling," she reported. "Claims to be your sister. She sounds upset." I instructed her to take messages, but not put any calls through. By the end of that day, my sister had called 17 times, each message becoming more frantic than the last. The voicemails painted a picture of a family in complete panic as the reality of their legal situation became clear. The second day brought calls from Marcus' Uncle Robert and even Aunt Patricia. My assistant dutifully took messages while I focused on legitimate client work. The messages revealed a family frantically searching for solutions to problems they were completely unequipped to handle. Jennifer's voicemail from Wednesday afternoon broke through her usual composed demeanor. "Nicholas, please call me back. I know we haven't talked since Christmas, but something terrible is happening. David has been arrested. Federal agents came to our house and seized everything, our computers, financial records, even our safe deposit box keys. I don't understand what's happening, but they're saying David stole money from Uncle Robert's company. Please, I need to talk to someone who might understand this legal stuff." Marcus left a message that evening. "Cousin, I know things have been weird between us, but I'm in serious trouble. The FBI says I'm liable for company loans that I don't even remember signing for. They're talking about taking my house, my car, everything. My wife is threatening to leave and take the kids. I don't know who else to call. You were always the smart one in school. Maybe you understand this financial stuff better than the rest of us." Uncle Robert's message came late Thursday night. His voice slurred either from alcohol or exhaustion. "Nicholas, this is your uncle. I know I haven't been the best family member to you over the years, but I need help. The government is saying I defrauded federal contracts. They're talking about 20 years in prison. 20 years, Nicholas. I'll die in there. Your aunt says you work in business now. Maybe you know someone who can help us figure this out." By Friday morning, they'd discovered that my old apartment was vacant. Jennifer had driven there finding new tenants who explained that the previous resident had moved months ago without leaving a forwarding address. She'd left another voicemail. "Nicholas, where are you? We went to your old place, but you're gone. Nobody knows where you moved. We need to find you. This family is falling apart, and I think you might be the only one smart enough to help us understand what's happening." What they didn't know was that I'd been monitoring their crisis through my professional networks. Federal prosecutors had filed formal charges against David for embezzlement and fraud. Uncle Robert's construction company faced immediate dissolution and asset seizure. Marcus had received notice that his personal assets would be liquidated to satisfy defaulted loan obligations. Aunt Patricia's mortgage company was under investigation by 3 different federal agencies. The most heartbreaking development concerned Mom. The house she'd lived in for 35 years, where she'd raised her children and hosted decades of family gatherings, was scheduled for foreclosure within 60 days. Uncle Robert's illegal use of the property as loan collateral had created a legal nightmare that threatened to leave her homeless. Over the weekend, they apparently hired a private investigator to locate me. The investigator was good. He traced my new address and office location within 48 hours. Monday morning brought a new escalation family members camping outside my office building. Marcus stood on the sidewalk near the main entrance, scanning every person who walked into the building. He'd grown thin since Christmas stress carving lines around his eyes that made him look years older. When I arrived through the parking garage entrance, I watched him through my office window, pacing back and forth like a lost animal, searching for something he couldn't find. Tuesday morning, Jennifer joined him. She'd lost weight too, and her usually perfect hair hung limp around her shoulders. They took turns approaching office security, showing photographs and asking if anyone had seen me. The security team followed my previous instructions perfectly, neither confirming nor denying my presence in the building. By Wednesday, Uncle Robert and Aunt Patricia had joined the sidewalk vigil. 4 family members now stood outside my building during business hours, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of the relative they'd spent years dismissing. They carried coffee cups and took turns leaving the group to use nearby restrooms, maintaining their watch with the dedication of people who finally understood how much they needed something they'd never valued. Thursday afternoon, Mom arrived. Seeing her standing on that sidewalk looking fragile and confused, stirred emotions I'd worked hard to suppress. She kept checking her phone, probably hoping I would respond to messages I hadn't read, glancing up at the building's 20 floors, as if she could somehow will me to appear. Their desperation was becoming public embarrassment. Passers-by stared at the family group camped outside a downtown office building, whispering to each other about the obvious crisis these people were facing. Building security finally approached them Friday afternoon, explaining that they couldn't continue loitering on private property. That evening, they came to my apartment building. I watched from my 20th floor window as they stood in the lobby arguing with the doorman about building security policies. Jennifer was crying openly now, her composure completely shattered. Uncle Robert kept pointing upward as if he could somehow force me to appear through sheer willpower. The final message arrived Saturday morning. Mom's voice, barely above a whisper. "Nicholas, I don't know if you're getting these messages, but please listen. We found where you live, but the building won't let us up to see you. We're all here in the lobby. Your sister is crying. Robert looks like he's aged 10 years this week. Everyone's scared, honey. Really scared. I know we haven't been the best family to you. I know Christmas was awful, and I'm sorry. But we need help, and you're the only one who might understand how to fix this mess. Please, sweetheart, I'm begging you. Just talk to us for 5 minutes." Saturday afternoon, they appeared outside my apartment building with signs. Actual cardboard signs, with messages written in marker, "Nicholas, please help us. We're sorry. Your family needs you." Sunday evening, I finally called Jennifer Walsh and asked her to schedule a meeting. "Tell them I'll see them tomorrow at 10 a.m. in conference room A. All of them. They get 1 hour to explain what they want, and then I decide whether to help them or not." The hunt was over. They'd found me humiliated themselves publicly and finally admitted they needed the family member they'd always considered least valuable. Now came the hard part, deciding whether people who'd spent decades treating me as disposable deserved salvation from someone they'd never thought was good enough to matter. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's typical January drizzle, but conference room A felt electric with tension as my family filed in. I'd chosen the largest meeting room deliberately, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city original artwork on the walls and a mahogany table that could seat 20 people. I wanted them to understand immediately that they were no longer dealing with the dismissed relative they remembered. I sat at the head of the table wearing my most expensive charcoal gray suit, flanked by Craig and our lead attorney, Sarah Martinez. 3 thick folders lay open before me, filled with documents I'd gathered over the past week. Behind me, the Seattle skyline stretched into the distance, a reminder of the world I'd built while they weren't paying attention. They entered quietly, almost reverently, their eyes taking in details they'd never expected to see. Mom moved slowly, clutching Aunt Patricia's arm for support. Uncle Robert had developed a nervous tic, his left eye twitching every few seconds. Jennifer looked like she hadn't slept in days, and Marcus kept glancing around the room as if he couldn't believe this level of success was real. "Please sit down," I said, my voice professional and controlled. They arranged themselves across from me like defendants facing a judge, which wasn't far from the truth. I opened the first folder and spread documents across the table. "Before we begin, I want you to understand that I know everything. Federal wire fraud charges against David for $850,000 in embezzled funds. Construction contract fraud totaling $2.1 million. Mortgage fraud involving 63 falsified property transactions. Money laundering through 17 different shell companies. asset forfeiture proceedings against properties worth approximately $4.8 million. Uncle Robert's face went white. How do you know all that? We just found out about half of those charges yesterday. I leaned back in my chair. Because this is what I do for a living: crisis management and federal criminal defense. I specialize in exactly the kind of legal nightmare you're facing right now. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. Jennifer finally broke it, her voice barely audible. You're a lawyer. Corporate crisis consultant, I corrected. I help companies and individuals navigate federal investigations, restructure failing businesses, and negotiate with prosecutors to avoid prison sentences. Last year, my firm saved clients approximately $200 million in fines and prevented 43 executives from going to federal prison. Aunt Patricia looked confused. But we thought you worked at some small office downtown. We thought you were struggling to make ends meet. I gestured toward the windows behind me. This is the 20th floor of the Columbia Center. My firm employs 15 people and operates from a 5,000 square foot office suite. Our client roster includes Fortune 500 companies and major law firms. Last month's billings exceeded $3.7 million. Marcus was staring at the legal documents spread across the table. Those are our files. How did you get our files? Federal investigations are public record once charges are filed, Sarah Martinez explained. Mr. Carson requested copies of all relevant court documents related to your cases. He's been analyzing your legal situation since the investigation became public. I opened the second folder, revealing financial projections and asset calculations. Here's your situation in simple terms. David faces 15 to 20 years in federal prison for embezzlement. Robert faces 20 to 25 years for contract fraud and money laundering. Patricia faces 10 to 15 years for mortgage fraud and conspiracy. Marcus faces personal bankruptcy and potential criminal liability for loan fraud. Mom was crying now, tears falling onto the polished table surface. How much prison time are we talking about total? If convicted on all charges, approximately 70 years combined. I answered matter-of-factly. David's case alone involves $800,000 in provable theft. Federal sentencing guidelines are very specific about white-collar crime penalties. Uncle Robert's voice cracked when he spoke. Is there any way to avoid prison? Any deals we can make? I opened the third folder, revealing a comprehensive legal strategy I'd developed over the weekend. Possibly. Federal prosecutors are often willing to negotiate plea agreements that reduce prison sentences in exchange for full restitution and cooperation with ongoing investigations. However, such negotiations require sophisticated legal representation and significant financial resources. How much money are we talking about? Jennifer asked. My firm's standard fee structure for federal criminal defense begins at $500,000 per defendant, plus a percentage of any assets we successfully protect from forfeiture proceedings. For a case of this complexity, involving multiple defendants and charges across several federal agencies, you're looking at approximately $2 million in legal fees. The room fell silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing. Uncle Robert put his head in his hands. Marcus stared at the table like he was trying to burn a hole through it with his eyes. $2 million, Aunt Patricia whispered. We don't have $2 million. We don't have $200,000. All our assets are frozen or seized. I nodded. I'm aware of that. Which brings us to the central question: why should I take your case, knowing that payment would be difficult or impossible? They looked at each other then, back at me, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, Jennifer spoke. Because we're your family. Family, I repeated slowly. The same family that laughed when Uncle Robert suggested you should be grateful I still remember your name. The family that gave everyone Christmas gifts, except me. The family that spent 30 years treating me like a burden you had to tolerate. Uncle Robert finally looked up from his hands. Nicholas, I know we haven't been good to you. I know Christmas was terrible, and I know we've never appreciated you the way we should have. But we're desperate. We're scared. And you're the only person who might be able to save us from losing everything. I stood up and walked to the windows looking out at the city below. You're right about one thing. I am the only person who can save you. I have the expertise, the connections, and the resources to navigate this crisis. The question is whether you deserve salvation from someone you've never treated with respect or kindness. When I turned back to face them, their expressions had shifted from confusion to understanding. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing me not as the family disappointment, but as someone who held their entire future in his hands. Here are my terms, I said, returning to my seat. Complete transparency about all financial dealings. No family involvement in legal strategy decisions. Written acknowledgement of specific instances where you treated me poorly. Public accountability for years of dismissive behavior. And an understanding that any reversion to old patterns means immediate withdrawal of my support. Mom looked up through her tears. You'll help us? I'll consider helping you, I corrected. But it will be on my terms following my strategy with complete respect for my expertise and authority in this matter. The family dynamics that brought us to this point end today, or you face federal prison without my assistance. They looked around the table at each other, finally understanding that their survival depended entirely on the person they'd spent decades undervaluing. The power had shifted completely, and there was no going back to the way things used to be. The next meeting took place 1 week later, same conference room, same arrangement. But this time I'd added requirements that went far beyond legal strategy and financial planning. Change documents sat in front of each family member. Formal accountability statements I'd drafted with surgical precision. Before we discuss legal defense strategies, I began, we need to address the relationship patterns that brought our family to this point. These aren't just criminal charges you're facing. They're the consequences of decades of poor decisions enabled by family dynamics that prioritized image over integrity. I handed Jennifer the first document. This is your accountability statement. Read it aloud, please. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. I, Jennifer Carson Williams, acknowledge that I have consistently treated my brother Nicholas with condescension and dismissal. Specific examples include interrupting him during family conversations, rolling my eyes when he offered opinions, excluding him from family social media posts, and making jokes about his career choices without bothering to learn what his actual job entailed. I acknowledge that my behavior was cruel and unfair, and I commit to treating Nicholas with the respect he has always deserved. She looked up at me, tears already forming. Nicholas, I never realized how often I did those things. Reading it all together like this, I'm ashamed of myself. Uncle Robert's statement was next. I, Robert Manning, acknowledge that I have consistently treated my nephew Nicholas as less important than other family members. Specific examples include making cruel jokes about his worth to the family, suggesting he should be grateful for basic inclusion, dismissing his academic achievements as impractical, and never asking about his professional accomplishments or personal life. My behavior at Christmas dinner was particularly cruel and inexcusable. I acknowledge that my treatment was wrong and commit to recognizing Nicholas as a valuable and respected family member. His voice broke during the last sentence. Kid, I was wrong. Really, truly wrong. I let my own insecurities make me mean to someone who never deserved it. Marcus read his statement with growing emotion. I, Marcus Chen, acknowledge that I have consistently borrowed money and possessions from my cousin Nicholas, without returning them or acknowledging the debt. Specific examples include borrowing $3,000 for car repairs and never repaying it, taking his laptop for a few days, and keeping it for 6 months and using his credit card for emergency expenses without permission. I also acknowledge spreading family gossip that suggested Nicholas was unsuccessful and directionless. I commit to making full financial restitution and treating Nicholas with honesty and respect. Aunt Patricia's statement addressed her role in undermining my reputation. I, Patricia Manning, acknowledge that I have consistently shared negative opinions about my nephew Nicholas with other family members and friends. I portrayed him as the problem child of the family, without knowing facts about his life or achievements. I acknowledge that my gossip damaged his reputation and relationships within our extended family. I commit to correcting these misrepresentations and supporting Nicholas publicly and privately. Mom's statement was the longest and most detailed. I, Eleanor Carson, acknowledge that I have consistently favored my daughter Jennifer over my son Nicholas, giving her opportunities, attention, and emotional support that I denied to him. Specific examples include missing his graduation to attend Jennifer's less significant events, featuring Jennifer prominently in family photos, while minimizing Nicholas's presence, discussing Jennifer's achievements with pride, while rarely mentioning Nicholas's accomplishments, and allowing other family members to criticize Nicholas without defending him. I acknowledge that Christmas dinner represented the culmination of years of unfair treatment, and I take full responsibility for creating family dynamics that made my son feel unwelcome and unvalued. I commit to treating both my children with equal love, respect, and pride. The silence after Mom finished reading was profound. Everyone was crying except me. I'd learned years ago that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford if I wanted to survive and succeed, despite their treatment. Now, I continued, let's discuss the specific changes required for me to represent you in this criminal matter. First, all family financial decisions will be reviewed by me before implementation. No major purchases, investments, or loans without my approval. Second, family gatherings will include me as an equal participant, not a tolerated presence. Third, my professional achievements will be acknowledged and respected, not minimized or ignored. Fourth, any reversion to previous patterns of dismissive behavior will result in immediate termination of my legal representation. I opened another folder. Here's what I can do for you if you agree to these terms. David's case can likely be reduced from 15 years to 3 years, with full restitution and cooperation. Robert's charges can potentially be reduced from 25 years to 5 years if we can prove the fraud was partially unintentional and demonstrate full compliance with restructuring requirements. Patricia's case might be reduced to probation and fines if we can show the mortgage fraud was systematic rather than personally motivated. Marcus's personal liability can be minimized through proper bankruptcy procedures that protect essential assets. Uncle Robert leaned forward. You can really keep us out of prison. I can significantly reduce your prison time and potentially eliminate it for some of you. But it requires complete honesty with federal prosecutors, full financial restitution, and ongoing compliance with strict legal requirements. Most importantly, it requires you to acknowledge that the family member you've always dismissed is now your only hope for avoiding federal prison. Jennifer was sobbing openly. We were so wrong about you. All these years we thought you were struggling, and you've been more successful than any of us. We treated you terribly, and now you're the only one who can save us. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard, drawing a timeline that showed their legal proceedings over the next 18 months. Here's what happens next. We file for bankruptcy protection for the construction company while negotiating plea agreements. We restructure Aunt Patricia's mortgage company under federal oversight. We arrange restitution payments that satisfy prosecutors while preserving enough assets for you to rebuild your lives. And we hope that federal judges see genuine remorse and meaningful change when they decide your sentences. Mom looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not just respect, but genuine pride. I should have supported you all these years instead of criticizing you. You became exactly the kind of man your father hoped you'd become, and I was too blind to see it. Marcus nodded vigorously. I spent so much time thinking I was the successful athlete in the family, and you were quietly building something amazing while we weren't even paying attention. The irony, I said, returning to my seat, is that your rejection taught me to find validation through achievement rather than approval. Every time you dismissed me, I worked harder to prove my worth through success. Your lack of faith in me became the motivation that built everything you see around us today." Uncle Robert shook his head in wonder. "So your success happened because we treated you badly, partly to parsons," I admitted, "but also because I chose to respond to adversity by becoming stronger rather than bitter. That choice is what separates people who overcome challenges from people who become victims of their circumstances." I placed contract documents on the table. "These are formal legal representation agreements. Sign them, and I'll file motions with federal court tomorrow morning to begin plea negotiations. Refuse to sign them, and you face these charges with public defenders who handle 200 cases simultaneously and have no experience with complex financial crimes." They signed without hesitation. Jennifer added a note at the bottom of her contract: "Thank you for saving us, even though we never deserved it." As they filed out of the conference room, I realized something profound had shifted. For 30 years, I'd been seeking their approval and acceptance. Today, for the first time, they were seeking mine. The relationship dynamic had reversed completely, and there was no going back to the old patterns that had caused so much pain. The reckoning was complete. Now came the harder work of rebuilding trust and saving them from the consequences of decades of poor decisions. But this time it would happen on my terms, with my rules, and with the respect I should have received from the beginning. 18 months later, I stood in the same federal courthouse where my family's legal nightmares had begun, but this time as a witness to their redemption rather than their destruction. Judge Morrison had just finished delivering the final sentences in what the press had called the Manning construction case, and the results exceeded even my optimistic projections. David received 2 years in minimum security federal prison plus 5 years supervised probation. More importantly, the judge acknowledged his cooperation with federal investigators and his commitment to full restitution. He would serve his time at a facility that allowed weekend visits and work release programs, meaning Jennifer and their children could maintain their family relationship while he paid his debt to society. Uncle Robert's sentence brought tears to everyone's eyes. Instead of the potential 25 years he'd faced, Judge Morrison sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison plus 10 years probation. The judge specifically cited the complete restructuring of his business practices and his genuine remorse as factors in the reduced sentence. At 62 years old, Uncle Robert would serve his time and return home to rebuild his life with his family intact. Aunt Patricia received the best outcome of all: 3 years probation community service and financial penalties, but no prison time. Her mortgage company had been completely restructured under federal oversight, and she'd voluntarily surrendered her real estate license to demonstrate accountability. The judge praised her cooperation and noted that she'd helped prosecutors identify other fraudulent schemes in the industry. Marcus's personal bankruptcy had been completed 6 months earlier, but the proceedings preserved his family home and his ability to earn income through legitimate employment. He'd found work as a construction foreman with a company that specialized in legitimate federal contracts, a job I'd helped him secure through my business connections. Mom's house had been saved through a complex legal arrangement that satisfied the fraudulent loan obligations while preserving her ability to remain in her family home. The restructured mortgage payments were manageable on her retirement income, and the threat of homelessness had been eliminated completely. But the real transformation went far beyond legal outcomes. Over those 18 months, I'd watched my family rebuild not just their finances and reputations, but their relationships with each other and with me. The changes were profound and genuine. Jennifer had discovered a talent for business administration that she'd never known she possessed. I'd hired her to manage office operations for my firm, and her attention to detail and organizational skills had improved our efficiency dramatically. More importantly, she'd become the sister I'd always hoped for: supportive, respectful, and genuinely interested in my life and success. Uncle Robert spent his prison time completing business management courses and substance abuse counseling. When he was released, he returned to construction work as an employee rather than an owner following ethical practices under close supervision. Our relationship had evolved from antagonistic to genuinely affectionate. He now introduced me to his friends as my nephew, the attorney who saved our family. Marcus had embraced sobriety and financial responsibility with remarkable dedication. His marriage had not only survived, but strengthened as he learned to prioritize honesty and accountability over image and pride. He'd repaid every dollar he'd borrowed from me plus interest and had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. Aunt Patricia had channeled her real estate knowledge into legitimate consulting work, helping other families navigate foreclosure prevention and mortgage restructuring. Her new career was less lucrative than her previous schemes, but it provided steady income and genuine satisfaction from helping people solve problems legally and ethically. Most significantly, Mom had become the mother I'd always needed. She attended every family gathering with obvious pride in my achievements, introduced me to her friends as my successful son, and made deliberate efforts to treat Jennifer and me with equal attention and affection. The change wasn't just behavioral, it seemed to come from genuine understanding of the pain her favoritism had caused. Christmas dinner this year took place at my penthouse apartment. I'd finally revealed the full extent of my success to my family, and their reactions had been everything I'd hoped for: pride, amazement, and genuine happiness for my achievements rather than resentment or minimization. As I carved the turkey, I looked around the table at faces that showed real contentment for the first time in years. David was home on work release, spending the holiday with Jennifer and their children before returning to serve the remainder of his sentence. Uncle Robert shared stories about his prison education programs and his plans for legitimate business ventures. Marcus talked enthusiastically about his new job and his family's financial stability. Aunt Patricia discussed her consulting clients and her volunteer work at a financial literacy nonprofit. Mom sat at the other end of the table, occasionally catching my eye and smiling with an expression that combined gratitude, pride, and love. Earlier that day, she'd given me a gift that meant more than any expensive item she could have purchased: a framed photo of Dad and me from my business school graduation with a note that read, "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what he always knew." Jennifer raised her wine glass as dessert was served. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice steady and clear, "to Nicholas, who saved us from our own mistakes and taught us what it means to be a real family. We spent years not appreciating the most successful person at this table, and we'll spend the rest of our lives being grateful that he loved us enough to help us anyway." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete acceptance from people whose approval I'd stopped needing. Their respect felt wonderful, but it wasn't necessary for my happiness or self-worth. I'd learned to find those things within myself, regardless of how others treated me. "I want to share something with all of you," I said, standing with my own glass. 5 years ago, I would have given anything to hear words like that from this family. Today, I'm grateful to hear them, but I don't need them to know my worth. The greatest gift you gave me wasn't your eventual approval. It was forcing me to find my strength and value independent of your opinions. That lesson made me successful in business, and more importantly, it made me successful as a person. Uncle Robert nodded slowly. "We taught you that by accident, but you learned it on purpose. That says everything about your character and nothing good about ours." "But we're different now," Marcus added. "All of us. Going through this crisis, seeing how you handled everything, learning what real integrity looks like, it changed us permanently." As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Nicholas, I need you to know something. What you did for us wasn't just about legal representation or financial planning. You showed us what we could become if we chose to be better people. You saved us from prison, but more importantly, You saved us from ourselves." I hugged her, feeling for the first time that it was completely genuine on both sides. "We all saved ourselves, Mom. I just provided the tools and guidance. The choice to change came from each of you individually." Late that night, as I cleaned up the dinner dishes in my apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The family that had laughed at me 2 Christmases ago now depended on my guidance for major decisions and genuinely valued my presence in their lives. But the real victory wasn't their transformed treatment of me. It was my own evolution from someone who desperately sought their approval to someone who could offer love and support without needing anything in return. The little boy who had been overlooked and dismissed had grown into a man who could save others from their worst mistakes while maintaining his own integrity and boundaries. That transformation was worth more than any Christmas gift, any family approval, or any professional achievement. Success wasn't just about building wealth or solving complex legal problems. Real success was about becoming someone who could extend grace to people who had never offered it while maintaining enough self-respect to demand better treatment going forward. It was about turning adversity into strength, rejection into motivation and pain, into the foundation for helping others heal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new clients with crises that needed solving, and new opportunities to use my skills and experience to make a positive difference in the world. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace with my family relationships and completely confident in my own worth. The Christmas dinner I dreamed of for 30 years had finally happened, not because they'd suddenly decided to include me, but because I'd become someone worthy of respect regardless of their recognition. And that made all the difference between a gift given reluctantly and love shared freely. I hope this story resonates with anyone who has ever felt undervalued by the people closest to them. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's dismissive treatment actually motivated you to prove your worth in ways they never expected? Sometimes the people who doubt us end up giving us the greatest gift of all, the determination to succeed despite their lack of faith in our potential. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey from underestimation to achievement, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' recognition. Your support helps these stories reach people who need encouragement to keep pushing forward when the people around them can't see their potential. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, building success despite adversity, and finding the strength to demand the respect you deserve. Every subscription helps us continue sharing stories that inspire people to transform their pain into power and their setbacks into comebacks. Thank you for listening to this journey of family redemption and personal triumph. Remember, sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you that their approval was never necessary for your success. May you find the courage to build your own worth regardless of who does or doesn't recognize it along the way.